Hello and welcome, I'm the Rambling Director. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. The past few years I've more or less followed in the trope that a lot of film YouTubers do, where I talked about my favorite films that came out in a given year. I'm not going to do that this time. This time I'm just going to talk about my favorite films I saw last year. Could have come from any time frame, and a lot of them are older movies. Some of these are movies that I have seen before, some of them are movies I've never seen before, but these are movies that I felt the need to talk about because they were movies that helped define 2024 for me. So without any further ado, let's get right into it. First up is Inherit the Wind with Spencer Tracy. I really liked this one. It's about the Scopes trial, which if you don't know, was about teaching evolution and whether or not that contradicts the idea that God created the earth. And the guy who is defending this, played by Spencer Tracy, is kind of defending the perspective that you could believe in science and that it doesn't have to contradict religion. What I love about this, especially, and by the way, spoilers for all these movies, is the ending where he actually shows that a lot of people are assuming he's an atheist throughout this movie because he doesn't express any bias throughout, because he's just fighting his defense case. A little dialogue he has at the end where the guy basically says, like, "You're an old fraud. How do you believed it all this time and you were acting like you didn't." I really like that because he never denies that he is religious. However, he's just not willing to let that get in the way of fighting the case in the best way that he can. And then at the end, he basically says science and religion can work together. I really thought that was quite a cool little message, and I also like that it doesn't focus on it, but it does kind of bring into this that the people who were defending the creationist position were not necessarily young earth creationists in the modern sense. They also did not necessarily take the book of Genesis entirely literally, which is true to life. West of Zanzibar. Now this is crazy because it's one of the only Lon Chaney films that I haven't seen, Lon Chaney Sr., that I haven't seen in its entirety, and I found it this year. I really had a hard time, I don't know why, I had a hard time locating this movie over the years. Yet as a huge Lon Chaney Sr. fan, he's my favorite actor of all time, it was kind of a shameful thing for me to say I'd never seen West of Zanzibar, but the truth is, I hadn't looked for it for several years because everywhere I looked at one point, I couldn't get a hold of it, that it just didn't cost a fortune. So to finally see it streaming somewhere and get to watch it was a real pleasure, and I've watched it a couple times now. Black Magic with Orson Welles. This one, I'd never heard of this movie, but it is a really great one. He basically plays a hypnotist who is able to kind of scheme his way up the ladder to the top echelon of French royalty, and he does it basically by just convincing people of things, like basically hypnotizing them. And it's really cool movie. If I had one criticism of it, it's that the opening little prologue, it feels very Bride of Frankenstein-y, so I guess maybe that's what they were going for, but it didn't work nearly as well. I thought they could have cut that whole prologue out, and it didn't do anything for the movie. Rope by Alfred Hitchcock. Now, I've seen this one several times, but every time I watch it, it's a real pleasure. This movie is often kind of overshadowed by two things. The fact that it has kind of a gimmick working for it, which is that Hitchcock wanted the whole thing to feel like a play, so it looks like it's all done in one single take, except for a couple of cuts that are really noticeable, and then I think twice when the film actually just does a hard cut to something else and draws attention to itself. Now, that is a gimmick, it's true, and Hitchcock himself kind of disowned the film later and said that he felt like it was kind of a stunt he pulled, but I've always thought that it really helped the pacing of the film because it feels like you were watching all of this in real time, because you are watching it in real time. The other thing it gets overshadowed for is that the two main characters who commit the murder are gay. This was at a time when you did not typically see gay people in movies, and so I understand some people get upset about it and think, oh, well, there's no good gay people in the movie. So it kind of seems like they're saying gay people are murderers. Well, listen, if you show me a movie where a straight couple commit a murder, and there's no other straight couples in the movie, I'm not going to automatically assume that you're saying all straight couples are evil homicidal maniacs. Now, you might say, at the time, it wasn't a good PR, for gay people. But in today's world, it doesn't do any damage to just have a gay couple who happen to commit a murder in a movie. I need to clarify, the way I said that sounded strike that from the record. But once you get past those two things that, again, do tend to overshadow the film as a whole, it is a really, really great story. I love the way it's structured. These two guys basically commit a murder because their teacher, who's kind of like a Lord Henry Wotton sort of character, he basically is saying that murder isn't wrong, it's just that only the top the highest class people can do it and get away with it because intelligence, and it's a classist sort of thing. I won't spoil the ending and what happens to these two guys who commit the murder, but I highly recommend you watch it. When I last checked, it was on YouTube. One of the few Hitchcock movies that is on YouTube, so now you know, be free, go and watch the movie Rope. My Dinner with Andre. This is one I've heard about for years, and to tell you the truth, I always kind of thought it sounded boring. But I watched it one night about 2 a.m., because that's when I watch a lot of movies, and I was baffled by how enthralling the conversation is between these two men. And what's wild is that it was based on conversations that they had in real life, and they more or less just kind of mushed together a bunch of conversations into a single one that explores religion and life and deeper meaning and art and family and society. I mean, there's very few things that don't get talked about in this movie. And it's an incredible journey. And when you leave that dinner, you really feel like you have been somewhere. It's incredible how a single conversation, more or less filmed in real time, can give you a sense that you really covered a whole philosophy. Now, I said I wasn't going to put these in order. I was going to keep them in the order that I saw these movies, and I am, but I'll just tell you that the next one on my list is my favorite movie I saw last year. It's a bizarre movie I had never even heard of, called Valerie and Her Week of Wonders. It's a Czechoslovakian film, and the whole movie is a dream. Now, I know, when you say that, people go, oh, that's lazy writing. The person wakes up at the end and it was all a dream. No. Much like Eyes Wide Shut by Stanley Kubrick, Valerie and Her Week of Wonders, the character never actually wakes up from the dream. And because it kind of dips in and out of very realistic and very surreal scenes, you're never really sure how much she is interpolating from her real life and how much is just in the dream. This movie actually does capture the experience of being in a dream better than any other movie. There are moments that are just so... Let me give you an example. So, there is a bishop who later, we stop calling him a bishop and he becomes like the mayor of the town. But then later we stop thinking he's the mayor of the town, and then it turns out that he actually has a relationship to Valerie, the main character. And I'm not going to tell you what that relationship is because you really just need to watch this movie. It's so weird. But it's that kind of logic where, like in a dream, you might have a certain relationship to this person, and then without them changing anything about their physical appearance, anything, you remember the scenes that happened before, but suddenly they just have a new relationship to you. It's that kind of logic. And there's a scene where he comes up to Valerie with his cape. He's a vampire. It's that kind of movie. And he pulls his cape out and he wraps his cape around her. And he just kind of talks to her. It's never really mentioned why he feels the need to talk to her like this, or why they kind of keep walking a little bit, but with the cloak around them. It's really odd. But right before he grabs her with the cloak, he has, it looks like a dog is strapped to his chest. It's never there for the rest of the movie. It's never even mentioned again. And it's that kind of weird detail that you have when you wake up from a dream and you're like, what the heck was that about? Wait a minute, that didn't seem weird when I was there, but now I'm questioning, what the heck was that about? So this is a coming of age story, and the girl apparently had her first period sometime before the dream, and that is why this dream is happening, is like it kind of represents her coming of age. I just cannot compliment enough how this movie is so surreal, but it is enthralling the whole time. There's very few movies that are like that I really get into. Sometimes I'll get into like a movie by David Lynch or somebody, but a very, very unusual for me to like a movie that is this surreal. So the fact that it just enthralled me from beginning to end, I liked it so much that I gave it an honor that only a couple of movies that I watched in 2024 have received, which is that I bought it on DVD. That's how much I liked this film. They Live by John Carpenter. Now, here's the wild card in this, okay? I have seen They Live when I was a kid. I was in high school, and I didn't really like it. I never got why people praised it so much, but on this watching, years later, as I've had time to grow up, I did like it a lot better. It's not one of my favorite movies by any means, but it is a movie that I still put on this list because I greatly enjoyed it. The Unknown, starring Lon Chaney Sr. and Joan Crawford in one of her early roles. Now, I've seen this movie more times than I can count, but I love it. I watch it at least a couple times a year. This is one of my favorite movies of all time. The movie basically is about this murderer who has a genetic disorder where he has two thumbs. Like right on the very end of his thumb, there's two thumbs. And so he joins a circus where he pretends to be an armless man so that he can avoid suspicion. After all, if he doesn't have arms, then nobody can catch him because of his thumb, right? Well, he falls in love with Joan Crawford's character, and there's kind of a love triangle with Norman Carey, you know, Raoul from Phantom of the Opera, who is also in love with her, but she is petrified of men's hands. And so she loves Lon Chaney Sr.'s character because he has no hands to touch her with. And he thinks that they're going to be in love and be together forever, but he knows that if they get married, then eventually she will see him shirtless and know that he does have hands. So one night, he murders a guy at the circus, and he has to leave and go and blackmail a surgeon into cutting off his arms for real. In the time it takes him to heal from that surgery, when he comes back, he finds that Joan Crawford has gotten past her fear of hands, and oh no, she's in love with Norman Carey. And there is this unimaginably... It might be one of the greatest moments in cinematic history, where Lon Chaney Sr., it's even in a medium shot. It's not a particularly close-up. It's just some of the greatest acting I've ever seen, where he realizes that he cut off his arms for nothing. And there's like, gosh, it must be a minute or two, like a full minute or 2 minutes, where he starts laughing, and his eyes are tearing up, and you can tell like he's caught between not knowing how to react to this. And his laugh is not like he's going crazy or something, which is kind of the stereotypical reaction. No, it's a laugh of deep emotional distress, and also the tragic irony of all of this is kind of funny to him, and he's genuinely laughing. It's an incredible performance, and Chaney's performance throughout the whole thing is just amazing. It's one of his key and essential characters. I think it might actually be the character that kind of sums up the Lon Chaney character, because all of his greatest characters, all the ones that we remember, seem to be people who are in love and can't get the girl for one reason or another. They go through heartache and pain. A good half of it is typically self-inflicted, and they still lose, and normally end up dying or sacrificing their life. And this is kind of, like I said, just the quintessential Chaney character, even more so than the Phantom, in my humble opinion. Terror at the Wax Museum. You know, I thought this movie would be a remake of House of Wax or Mystery at the Wax Museum, and it's not. It is a murder mystery, and it is a very clever murder mystery, where one of the wax figures seemingly is coming to life and murdering people. And it's the wax figure of Jack the Ripper, of course. Now, I'm really into the Jack the Ripper case. I like true crime. I'm really into Jack the Ripper. I consider myself something of an amateur ripperologist. And this movie, it does actually take the time to comment on the fact that Jack the Ripper only killed prostitutes. But they also kind of brush it under the rug like, well, I guess he changed his MO. No. But anyway, besides that little bit, it's a great film. Something to Sing About, starring James Cagney. This one was so good. It's one of those James Cagney movies that I'd never seen before, and I was so impressed by the comedy in it. It is a really, in modern terms, it is a funny movie. The reason I think that the movie is funny, though, is because there's not a whole lot of jokes, and the jokes that are there are very modern. But what happens more often than not is just that the characters are very funny characters. And so even when they're not telling jokes, you're still smiling and laughing and having a great time because they're just characters you like having an adventure with. In particular, I love, was he a hairdresser? Dwight Frye plays in this, and he's either a costumer or a hairdresser, and he's so flamboyant and so funny. Gosh, he's hysterical. So Cagney's character has an Asian assistant who keeps using this really stereotypical Chinese accent. And at one point, Cagney asks him something, and the guy just drops the accent, talks in a regular Northern American accent. And Cagney's like, hold on a second, you were faking? And the assistant is like, yeah, people think it's more authentic when I'm using the accent. What's even funnier is whenever he's talking to Cagney privately, he uses his real accent, and then whenever somebody else comes in, he jumps into the Chinese stereotype voice again. Gosh, that is just so funny. Because, for the time period, you know what? You'd be hard-pressed to make a joke like that today with the way people are so sensitive. The Return of the Vampire, starring Bela Lugosi. I loved this movie. I had never seen this movie. I don't know how. I thought I had seen it, but when I started watching it, I couldn't remember any of it. So I guess you could say maybe I have seen it, but I do not remember a thing about this movie. Then I start watching it, and I was enthralled from beginning to end. And may I say, I actually think that Bela's performance as a vampire in this is even better than his performance as Dracula. The Poltergeist. This is one that I said in one of my Halloween videos. I hadn't seen The Poltergeist before this year. I know. I don't know how. I really cannot figure out how that movie slipped by me, because it's one of the greatest horror movies of all time, right? Like, that's one of the movies everybody rates in their top 10. Don't know how I missed it, but it's one of my new favorites solely because the horror is good in the puppets and the effects and everything. The house, I'm not going to spoil it, but the house does something at the end of the movie. I think about it every few days. I'm thinking, How did they do that effect? If anybody knows, please let me know, because I've been unable to find any videos or anything in the making of it. I want to know how they did that house thing at the end of the movie. That was amazing. That was an incredible effect. No, but the thing that I really love about this movie was not the horror, was not the effects. The actors are great and the performances are brilliant, but what I loved about this movie, what endeared it to me as an instant classic, is how funny it is. This movie is hysterical. I'd recommend the movie to you, but everybody except me saw The Poltergeist before 2024. Conclave. Now we're getting into the very last few movies I saw last year. I loved the movie Conclave. All I seem to hear critics online saying about it is how woke it was. I don't like woke movies. I don't believe in shoving woke messages in there. That's why I don't watch any new Marvel movies. But that being said, Conclave is not woke. They basically show that the super SJW woke cardinal is a man of such little character that he was willing to sell out his own side. Okay, now the guy who goes on a racist tirade and is like, we can't have a black pope, that guy, all he has is words. That's all that is ever used against him. And everybody always says, like, Tedesco's the villain. No. He's a nasty character, but he is one of the only people who does not have a scandal or something associated with him. The super SJW liberal, again, sells out his own side for power and money. The other liberal, turns out that he committed simony, which is, if you don't know, when you sell church or religious positions in exchange for money. In fact, the only person that is called a liberal in the movie that gets off scot-free is Ralph Fiennes. But even he says that he's not worthy to be Pope because he's having a crisis of faith. The idea of this movie is how everybody is unworthy to lead the church. Conclave is a movie that borders constantly on wanting to become a whodunit, but never quite does. It's a mystery film with about 5 or 6 mysteries in it, and a lot of mini conclusions, and then the ultimate kind of climax of the movie is the choice of the next pope. And that's kind of a neat thing, isn't it? Like, it's a movie that is not really structured in a traditional way. I also love that all these characters, good and bad, are such interesting characters. In fact, the only character I can say is kind of boring is the guy who gets picked as the next pope. And that's just because they never have him express an opinion beyond war is bad. Ransom, starring Mel Gibson, directed by Ron Howard. I only found out this movie existed because of a YouTube short of the famous scene where Mel Gibson is saying, "I'm not going to give you this money as a ransom. I'm offering this money as a bounty on your head. Do you know anybody who wouldn't sell you out for $2 million? Oh! Wow! Okay, so I love movies that have that kind of like revenge fantasy element to them, and this movie does. It's the sort of movie that you get sometimes where a character is just doing something that we all kind of think, man, I wish if I was ever in that situation I could just do that. And what I love about it is the whole movie, he never plays ball with the kidnapper. He is always in the offensive mode. And there's just a point that me and my friend John quote to each other all the time where he's like, "No money! Don't you understand English, you useless sack of no money!" And gosh, the movie is so fun. The emotion in it is really great, and Mel Gibson gives an incredible performance as a dad who just wants his son back. But at the same time, it is one of those movies that there's sort of a fantasy revenge sort of motive to it, because when he realizes they are going to kill his son even when he gives them the money, he's like, "I'm not giving you the money. There's no way you're ever going to get a dime out of me." And people misunderstand that and think he's being greedy, but he's actually just like, no, if I don't give him the money, that's another day that my son stays alive. Gosh, this movie, it was great. It kept me on the edge of my seat, and it is another one that I bought on DVD. And then the very last movie that I watched of 2024 is a movie that I'm going to be doing a full review of, so I won't talk as much in depth about it as I did some of the movies on this list. It's called Les Yeux Sans Visage. I can't speak French, so I probably mispronounced that. In English, it's Eyes Without a Face. This is a sublime work of French cinema. Oh my goodness, it is so wonderful. This movie... Okay, so I'm going to be reviewing the whole movie in my Phantom of the Opera Through the Years series, so I don't want to get too much into it. But basically, it is about a girl named Christiane who is in a car wreck and her face is disfigured. Her father, who is a brilliant surgeon, starts kidnapping and murdering women so that he can remove their faces and transplant them onto her. I won't spoil any more about this movie because I highly recommend everybody who can to go and watch it. It is one of the finest works of French cinema in my humble opinion. And again, I will be doing a full review on it if you want to hear more about my thoughts. And with that, that is all of my favorite movies that I watched in 2024. Thank you everybody for watching, God bless you, and I will see you in the next one.